Hi, I'm Dennis Hoffarth. I'm delighted to be here tonight sharing with you this webinar on carbon consciousness in the home because it relates to so much in my life that really matters to me. I've been living in an eco-village for 8 years, and we're standing now in a timber frame house that I recently built here with my partner, Sharon. I'm a civil engineer and a permaculture designer, and I have worked and been a co-founder and engineer at the South Face Energy Institute in Atlanta. I love teaching things that really matter to me. And one thing that matters to me the most is the climate crisis. Tonight, I'd like to share with you and guide you through some of the means and ways and ideas for you to live carbon consciously in your home. Let's start by looking at what makes up a carbon footprint. Considering the average home, let's name the key ways that our homes contribute to carbon emissions. Think about how this relates to what's in your home. The big three contributors of carbon from the home are the actual construction of the home, heating and cooling of the home interior, and, you probably guessed it, personal transportation. So what's the big deal about the impact of home construction? First of all, size matters. The bigger the house, the bigger the footprint. Then the type of materials you choose to build with makes a huge difference. Some materials may come from far away, so there are transportation costs in carbon. Some, like concrete, require major energy input before they get to you. Others, like natural building materials, are generally available close by and with little or no energy needed to make them. And design decisions made in building a home will affect the amount of carbon emissions generated throughout the lifespan of the house as well. Here we're talking about energy efficiency in the operation and maintenance of the home. I'll talk a lot about that more later. But this is what puts this category in the big three for me. The second of the big three is home heating and cooling. Two major factors come to play here: the source of energy for your heating or cooling, and how well your home is built to hold the heat or the coolness. What fuels are typically used for this? Natural gas, propane, fuel oil, or electricity produced from coal and oil, right? This results in a constant output of carbon emissions throughout the life of the house. That's a lot. Personal transportation, it's probably no surprise that for many Americans, transportation is the largest overall category in the household's carbon footprint. According to the EPA in 2013, greenhouse emissions from transportation amounted to about 27% of total U.S. gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. As individuals, of course, it depends on how well and how we get around and how much we get around. So, starting with these big three categories, what else adds to our footprint? Let's include appliances, primarily electric-based, and most of the electricity comes from fossil fuels. Cooking, mostly relying on fossil fuels in this country. Water heating, again, we generally use fossil fuels for this, either gas, natural gas, electricity from coal, oil. Lighting. Thankfully, the law now prohibits incandescent light bulbs for most uses, but halogen and fluorescent lighting still draw a good deal of power. And there's all the consumer products we buy. Stuff. The carbon problem here comes from the energy used to make and transport these products. Carbon emissions arising from raw materials extraction, processing, logistics, retail and storage, through the consumer use and disposal. This is called embodied energy. Some studies show the purchase of this stuff has a carbon footprint that rivals the big three above. Obviously, many of these categories overlap, and they can vary greatly based on individual circumstances. Okay, keeping all of these parts of the carbon footprint in mind, let's look at what you can do to become more carbon conscious in your home. Let's start with design of the house with low carbon in mind. As I mentioned before, the design of a home impacts your carbon footprint. So if you're building a home, take your time with design. If you're not planning to build anytime soon, all is not lost. There are many ways to retrofit your existing home. Either way, I think you'll find the following design concepts and techniques helpful. Let's start with the size of the home. Yes, size does matter. Obviously, the larger the structure, the more building materials that go into the project. Mining, manufacturing, and transporting all these materials each add up to a lot of fossil fuels burned and a greater carbon footprint. This input of fuels is called the embodied energy. So a smaller home can save tons of carbon emissions from the get-go. And if it's built, a smaller home requires less resources for the life of the home, less money, less materials to maintain the home, less energy to heat and cool the living space, and less space discourages oversized appliances, extra furniture to fill the rooms, and discourages the buildup of unnecessary stuff, and the list goes on. Like how many oversized appliances could we fit in this house? The average home today is over 2,000 square feet, often housing only 1 or 2 people. If you look on this graph, that compares to less than 1,000 square feet back in 1950. These statistics on the ballooning sizes of houses in recent decades are truly alarming. Even as the average number of occupants dropped, the average home size has nearly doubled since 1973. Our house, by comparison, is 700 square feet for 2 people. Contrasting with our neighbors Dee and Hassan, who live in a 200 square foot house. Note that's 100 square foot per person. This works for them because it's essentially their sleeping space and their hangout space. They get their meals, cooking, showering, and restroom needs met in shared facilities nearby. Clever use of space can make a smaller space, work well. Here we see a fold-out couch, so it can be used as a regular couch or a sleeping area. And it's in front of portable shelves, which double as a partition wall, getting more use out of each item. Other examples here at Dancing Rabbit include triple bunk beds, open floor plans with no interior walls, and yes, buying less stuff. Here's a question for you. Can you make your house smaller with actually changing its size? Think of the rooms in your house that may not be needed at all times. Maybe some can be used only seasonally. You can make your house smaller by simply deciding to use only part of it, meaning you can close off part of the house and use less energy to heat or cool it. Just shut the door. We also have some larger houses here at Dancing Rabbit, which accommodate many people. A good example of this is a 2,500 square foot house that you see on this screen. It has 6 bedrooms, and the residents share a common kitchen and living room, toilet, and showers, etc. This model of living, of course, is not uncommon across this country. Sharing oversized homes with compatible housemates, it isn't just a college student thing. You've probably also seen people rent out extra rooms in their basement if they have a large house, or to make better use of the space, saving money as well. A growing number of Americans live in co-housing communities with reduced space per person and shared eating space and other common areas. Choosing materials. As we've seen, design has an impact on carbon materials. So let's talk about choosing low carbon materials in our design to build the house. Materials which require less manufacturing, mining, and less transport to get to the building site are naturally less energy intensive. So looking at these two photos here, the straw on the top image, I think it really stacks up well against the energy intensive concrete in the lower image. Natural materials can reduce the carbon in a home by a great deal. They require little, if any, energy expended in manufacturing. At Dancing Rabbit, a large percentage of the material going into the structures is gathered directly from the building site, like clay and sand, or from very nearby, like straw bales or lumber. This minimizes the transportation energy involved, and much of our lumber used is reclaimed, recycled from old barns or other structures being demolished nearby. Obviously, this means the energy needed to harvest new trees and mill lumber are avoided. Other recycled building materials bring the same savings in carbon footprint. Straw bales are used commonly in buildings at Dancing Rabbit. Here is our bed and breakfast, which was under construction about 6 years ago. Let's go back to my house for a minute, and I'll give you a look at how we constructed our home with straw bales and other natural materials. Straw bales make up the east and west walls of our house, as well as parts of the north and south. They're 18 inches thick, providing an R value of about 45. That means a lot of cozy insulation. So they're not only easily available locally, saving on transportation fuel, but they are excellent in retaining the passive solar heat and repelling the summer heat. And they were produced with pure solar power, solar energy, by farmers nearby. What other natural material is right under our feet? Mud. Mud was used to cover the entire interior and exterior walls of this house. So you might say this is a mud hut, a building technique common across the globe. It's actually a material called cob plaster, and to mix it, we stomp cob. As you can see, it's best done with bare feet. It's primarily sand, clay, and water, and most of the clay for our walls came from our own homestead, from digging the foundation trench. And most of the water for the plaster mix was from the rain caught off the roof. This saved energy by minimizing transportation of materials, and compared to wood siding, or let's say brick facade, it saved bundles of energy in making and cutting materials. And speaking of cutting materials, we shaped the notches and joinery for our timber frame construction with a lot of cutting with hammers and chisels. This is called post and beam construction. It uses less wood than standard stick frame houses and allowed us to have a completely open floor plan, which helps greatly in air circulation and distribution of the wood heat in the winter. If you look at the timbers used here, these are called roundwood. And roundwood used like this can really help and save in the carbon footprint as well. It uses less wood than square milled posts and beams, and it avoids all the energy used to mill the flat square lumber. It's great when a lower carbon footprint yields a higher level of aesthetics. Now let's look at the earthen floor. We used an earthen floor instead of the common approach of pouring a concrete slab, and again we turned to the use of local mud and sand. We learned that a well-sealed earthen floor can be durable and beautiful. Since concrete is the most energy-intensive building material, we again saved a lot of carbon footprint credits. In fact, we decided to use no Portland cement whatever in this construction of this house. You see, to make cement, you have to heat it to very high temperatures, near 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's estimated that Portland cement is responsible for 7 to 10% of the carbon dioxide emissions worldwide. Recycled materials were used throughout our new home and in homes across the Ecovillager. Lumber is obtained by reclaiming boards from dilapidated houses and barns nearby, as well as used pallets and repurposed lumber left over from other building projects. We're also recycling auto tires. Our house includes the first tire wall at Dancing Rabbit. And we used recycled concrete from old floors and sidewalks for our foundation footings. Some have named this material urbanite, a new species of human-made rock. In addition to materials, we were very carbon conscious in our actual building process. We decided to use no petroleum-powered tools like chainsaws or petroleum-powered excavating equipment on this building site, hence the hand-dug trench. This is for our foundation. It took a while. Great exercise. We used only hand tools and solar-powered tools for the entire project. Let's move now to my tricks and tips for carbon-conscious heating and cooling. Do you have a climate crisis in your home? Do you have high heating and cooling bills and still not feel comfortable in your house in winter? Energy efficiency in homes is fundamental. Any energy you do spend to heat or cool your house should actually be held effectively in the house. We do this through insulation and sealing leaks of air through windows, cracks, etc. Not sexy, but the reduction in carbon emissions and the money we save is worth the effort. A recent Department of Energy study on weatherizing homes showed an average energy savings of over $400 per year per family, saving tons of carbon emissions. And just insulation alone installed in U.S. buildings saves about 12 quadrillion BTUs annually. After these energy efficient measures have been in place, to me, the most important element is taking advantage of passive solar opportunities. The thermal mass, excuse me a minute. Looking at this house, it actually does the heating work on its own by design. That's why it's called passive. Once you have that, you can add active heating or cooling systems as needed to supplement the passive solar. This type of design is prevalent at Dancing Rabbit. A well-insulated house with most of the windows to the south makes a great solar heat collector. Simple roof overhangs are built to block the summer sun. This is the main heat source for our house. The thermal mass of the earthen floor serves as storage for all the heat collected on a sunny day, and it gives that heat back to the house gradually overnight. Our wood stove is only used to supplement the heat provided by the sun. Now, you think you can use passive solar in your existing home? It's quite possible. Here's one idea that does involve some carpentry, but maybe you have some leaky windows and are considering replacing them with energy-efficient ones. That's a great idea. When you do this, consider rebuilding the window openings on the south side to be larger, letting in more passive solar energy in the cool months. If you do, take care to protect the outside of those windows from summer sun with adequate roof overhang or awnings, shade vines, or other means. Even simpler, you can select a south window or two and install a solar air heater, a window solar air heater. This unit is attached without having to reconstruct the walls. On the right is an example that Tom and Teresa installed on their house here at Dancing Rabbit. It's called a solar heat grabber. How does this work? Well, as the sun works on this surface of this unit, the air rises from the bottom of the window, bottom of the unit up to the top, gets heated, and goes into the building at the top. Very simple, passive system. If you already have significant south windows, you might consider adding some thermal mass to store some of the daytime solar heat for nighttime heat supplementing. A masonry or ceramic floor like this could help. The living roof in our house helps retain that solar heat. It serves multiple functions, primarily tempering the heat in the summer and cooled in the winter. It also cancels out the physical footprint of the structure as green vegetation is replaced on the roof where it was first removed from the yard. We're actually sinking carbon on our roof. We love being able to grow more of our own food right on the roof without needing to obtain more land for it. As much as we hope to maximize the benefits of passive solar heat, we do need supplemental active heating. Here at Dancing Rabbit, most of the active heating systems are wood stoves or wood furnaces. You might say, well, doesn't wood burning release carbon? Yes, but the trees growing for next year's firewood are removing carbon at the same time, resulting in a carbon cycle, which adds almost no net carbon to the atmosphere. However, if we're not conservative in our wood use, we risk breaking this cycle. In our house, we get double benefit from our wood-burning stove in the winter, not just heating the house, but cooking our meals simultaneously. So everybody wants to be the cook on those cold winter days. And on those cold winter days also, why turn up the thermostat if you don't have a wood-burning stove? Why heat all the space around you when all you need is to warm your fingers and toesies? A hot water bottle is just right. Tried and true, old-fashioned but great technology, and feels so cuddly and cozy, can't you tell? Let's look at summer cooling. You know, that sun is pretty hot in the summer. In fact, solar energy always is more powerful in the summer. Ironically, there are many ways which we need to protect our house from solar energy. One important summer problem has to do with west-facing windows. You've probably seen it. Late on a hot summer day when the sun is getting lower, it can enter those west windows in full force. An awning doesn't help because the sun sneaks underneath it. An excellent solution is a deciduous tree or two on the west side that can block the rays of the low-angle sun. We have 2 such trees at our house. Of course, our main barrier to the heat of the summer for our house is our living roof. It not only provides shade for the roof, but the damp soil and transpiration of the plants are naturally cooling. Can you install a regular living roof on your existing house? Probably not. You want the shade, but how do you get it without putting a lot of soil that's going to leak water into your roof? And maybe the weight of the soil will be a problem. And if it's like most houses, it's really too steep to fool around planting stuff up there. 2 of the residents here at Dancing Rabbit have implemented a non-regular way to have a living shade on the roof with vines. Here's a view of a grapevine that our neighbor Dan is training to grow across his roof. Now don't laugh. You can see that his idea is still at the beginning stage, but he's hoping next year it'll look more like this. And then to grow on, covering a much larger portion of his roof with shade. Another hot weather solution for us is our simple outdoor kitchen space. It's basically an open porch with a roof. So we do not cook in the house in the warm months. This keeps all that cooking heat outside, making the house cooler. And we use ceiling fans and floor fans if needed, making air conditioning unnecessary for us. Once again, saving cost and carbon impact. How about taking a moment to consider which of these heating and cooling tricks and tips you could use in your home. But you all take a deep breath, stand up and wiggle around a little bit if you want to make sure you don't get tired sitting there. We're going into a new subject now. Getting around the low carbon way. As we mentioned earlier, our personal transportation can be the largest part of our carbon footprint. We've worked hard to reduce this impact at Dancing Rabbit. Even in the middle of rural Missouri, we live well without owning our own personal cars. The heart of our vehicle strategy is vehicle sharing, ride sharing, and shared errands. Cobb will share more about that in detail in webinar 4. Well, let's talk about the type of fuel. The type of fuel used also makes a big difference. At Dancing Rabbit, we minimize petroleum fuel using vegetable-based biodiesel and electricity as our primary fuel sources. You've seen our electric car, and we also work with biodiesel. We've measured our vehicle miles and determined that we only drive 10% of what the average American drives. How? By biking and walking, carpooling, public transit. Particularly for long distance trips, we have a common custom of train travel. Each individual sets their own parameters, of course. For example, I and my partner have committed to no air travel in the U.S. unless it's an emergency. For every gallon of gas that we don't burn, we prevent 24 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions from entering the atmosphere. Can you be an eco-villager with no personal car? Think about ways to use the car less, or share a car with a neighbor. Look for ways to leave your car behind. Biking, walking, or taking transit to work and shopping. This car may look lonely in the driveway all day, but I assure you, it won't miss you. Think about whether you can do without your garage or your driveway. Reduce or eliminate driveway space and create a garden in its place. Can you picture this driveway cut in half? And with the width that is left to make a garden or a row of berry bushes where the pavement was removed? Here's a possible example. And when you build soil and grow plants, you're actually sequestering carbon. And there's more. Powering your home. Let's talk about electricity. It's a big one. First, light bulbs. When the world began turning away from incandescent bulbs, people turned largely to compact fluorescence, or CFL, bulbs. I ask, why not go all the way to LED? LED bulbs use about half the electricity of compact fluorescence and last a lot longer. For the equivalent light of a 60-watt incandescent, LEDs use only 7 or 8 watts, compared to 15 watts for the fluorescent bulb. Task lighting is another way to minimize your electric expenditures. You can save a lot by only lighting a small area where you do your common tasks, like over-the-counter lights in the kitchen, or a lamp where you're reading rather than lighting the whole room. Motion sensors on light switches reduce energy waste by switching off when there is no one in the room. Probably not a good idea if you'd like to sit a long time reading in the bathroom. Now let's take a moment to consider an important insight in how electricity works. Generally, using electricity produced from fossil fuels is more costly and prohibitively carbon intensive. This makes sense when you think of fossil fuels being burned to produce heat, to produce electricity, and then the inefficiencies of then transmitting it to you, and the losses and efficiency of converting it to heat for your home. Simply put, energy is lost along every step of the way. Besides cook stoves, other electric appliances can generally be a very significant energy draw. Here's another area where we in our home go small. Our refrigerator is only 1 1/2 cubic foot. We have learned to make that work well for us, at least after I gave up trying to store my 30-pack in there. It seems to help to have a root cellar, which does keep the beer plenty cool during hot months. And oh yeah, vegetables too. As you can see, our refrigerator is a top loader, making it more efficient. And ironically, the wash machine that we use is a front loader, which is also more efficient. So if you have a front-loading fridge and a top-loading washer, consider thinking backwards for your next purchase. In general, it's good to use super efficient appliances. Look for the Energy Star rating or better. If you currently have less efficient appliances, consider steps to modify them. The most common way is to place an insulating thermal blanket over your water heater. These can be purchased at your home supply or hardware store. My neighbor Cassandra has a bargain freezer that's not energy efficient. She's adding insulation to the outside of the appliance and measuring the electricity usage before and after with a watt meter to see if it makes enough difference. The appliance that sucks the most electricity is probably the clothes dryer. It's hard to make it very efficient because once again we're using electricity to produce heat. But wait, there's a carbon-free answer. Got it? It's a solar clothes dryer. Of course, and your financial investment in such an appliance? Pretty steep, the cost of a rope. You can also reduce the use of electrical appliances by using more human-powered devices. I'm really enamored with this option. Like using hand-cranked and bicycle-cranked powered appliances and tools, many of these used to be very common, like the egg beater, coffee grinder, can opener, hand drills, and even the hand saw. Now, even the toothbrush is an electric appliance. Have you ever cranked a manual ice cream maker? It adds to the fun and kids love it. Here's a hand crank blender I purchased recently at the country store. It made my day. In building our house, we used this bicycle-powered mixer for clay and straw. Our crew thanked us for the additional exercise opportunity. Now, each of these may be small drops in the bucket in the overall global climate crisis, but they are specific and tangible things that can keep you and your awareness on carbon and a carbon consciousness, if you will. When others see these small things, they may also become more aware and more inspired. Now, assuming that you still might need a little bit of power in your home after using all these devices, let's say you want to use solar or wind power now in your own home to reduce your electricity carbon footprint. You basically have 3 practical options. It may now be a good time to invest in your location to install solar panels on your house. The cost of solar systems has been continually dropping, and there's still a 30% residential solar tax credit. You can do a completely off-grid system with batteries, or as you see here, If you don't want to have batteries, you can connect directly to the grid and feed the extra power that you produce into the grid. A third option for using solely renewable energy or electricity for your house is to buy green power. Many utilities are now offering this option to customers. You pay slightly more for your electricity produced from solar, wind, or biomass generation. And if you look for the link in the resource page to the Department of Energy site detailing green energy options, you can find out which utilities offer it, possibly in your area. Give me a minute here to sort my papers. Okay. Let's talk about our stuff. The consumer goods we buy and fill our houses with all have a carbon cost. Think of all the embodied energy associated with the mining, the manufacturing, the transportation, the storage of all that stuff. It might be hidden, but it's there, and it adds up to as much as 20% of the home carbon footprint, according to the Department of Energy. When we moved to Dancing Rabbit, we immediately had much less space to store unnecessary items, so we had a lot of incentive to downsize. I had to get rid of lots of stuff. One way to reduce your stuff is simply to get rid of what you don't really need and things you haven't used maybe in the past 2 years, things you think you'll repair but you know you really won't, things you have duplicates of, things that aren't multi-purpose, things that you only use occasionally and could borrow from someone else. You can create your own criteria for what stays and what doesn't, but creating criteria and sticking to them is key if you want to make a difference here. Then what you do with that stuff, what do you do with it after you've culled? Well, yes, there are places to donate these things, and your beloved stuff could serve someone else. I like the idea of a free store or voluntary exchange of surplus stuff. Every week here at Dancing Rabbit, we have an up-for-grabs pile in the middle of our common room, and periodically we have a clothes swap. Seems like some folks here never have to buy new clothes because the used items are constantly cycled through the community. But what if I give up something, give it away, and then I need it? I found I really don't need to keep as much or as many tools and other stuff around because my neighbors are glad to lend theirs out, and to have some things that they might need. Lending libraries of all sorts are a great way to reduce storage needs and to build community. So while we can't cancel out the embodied energy of stuff, it's already been bought. We can reduce the impact by moving stuff on to someone else or by sharing it. And then there's the stuff you buy. Yes, the stuff in the store really has embodied energy in it. That's true. It already has the energy. But our economic system says that ultimately, the less we buy, the less there will be produced. Demand and supply, right? Let's talk about a few guidelines for buying things. Okay. See if this helps. Try buying secondhand if you can. Avoid goods that come with a lot of packaging. Buy handmade goods whenever you can. Buy locally to avoid transportation costs. Say to yourself, I'll buy goods from within 50 miles or 500 miles, or I'll only buy certain types of things that avoid transportation. You can set purchasing parameters. For example, you could say, I'll only buy sustainably certified wood, or I'll only buy fair trade Christmas gifts. Try to resist impulse buying. Do you really need it? Look for the durability in what you buy. Don't get caught in the trap of built-in obsolescence. Ask yourself, could it be simpler? Think of how much fun kids have with just a cardboard box. And finally, when you see any given product in a store, use your magic carbon detector glasses to analyze that product's past. Think embodied energy. In Britain and a few other places, there has actually been an effort to put a carbon label on products, like a nutritional label, so consumers can get a sense of their impact and be carbon conscious shoppers. Then you wouldn't have to use that magic carbon detector glasses trick. If this is of interest to you, you might want to pursue it with lawmakers. You could do the planet a real service. Okay, once you get all your stuff out of the way, maybe it's time to cook. In webinar 2, Ted and Sarah showed you some low-carbon cooking options. I want to talk just a little bit about another aspect of this. It's been a big part of my carbon consciousness, and I'd like to tell you a story of 2 outdoor cooking stoves that are special to me. First, the rocket stove. This is a device with a small fire chamber and a short chimney. Probably got its rocket name from the blast of hot fire you can produce up the top of the stack. It's being encouraged as an alternative to open cooking fires across the globe because it concentrates the cooking flame right onto the bottom of your pot and so uses much less wood to cook than an open fire. You can use small wood scraps, sticks, twigs, and lumber cutoffs as the main fire source. So it's an easy way to cook with wood with very little firewood cutting and splitting and processing. The one you see here is made with a metal base and cob around it for insulation. Here's another option, the brick fire stove, simply by stacking bricks to form an L-shaped chamber. No mortar, and completely movable. Perfect for a backyard or even a porch or apartment balcony. Now my really favorite. The biochar stove is currently my choice for the best carbon-conscious cooking, next to solar, of course. It produces cooking heat from any wood scraps or other biomass, and it creates charcoal. This is a biochar stove in operation. It uses a very low oxygen burn method so that none of the soot of normal wood fires is emitted. The flame you see is only the volatile gases burning. Here you can see the resulting charcoal. And here, in crushed form. You crush and mix it with urine and compost, and it becomes a really rich soil amendment. Urine, did you say? Yes, nitrogen-rich urine. And guess what? No odor, because it's immersed in charcoal. The extra beauty is that the carbon is locked up in the soil and sequestered forever. Consider whether you can use either of these cooking methods at your existing home. In the urban setting, you could probably use your outdoor grill area for a rocket stove or a biochar stove and wow your neighbors. Okay, deep breath. Let's talk about the energy or carbon impact heating water, and do it without heating the planet. At our place, we heat water with solar energy and with wood energy. What you see here is a simple batch solar hot water heater in our yard prior to connecting it up for service. It is just a recycled water heater tank in an insulated box with glass or glazing facing the sun. The black tank heats up, and the greenhouse effect traps the heat in the box, like your car in the summer. Here's a diagram of the simple setup. It's a passive system using no pumps, no motors. More complex active systems are also available, using solar collectors on the roof and pumps circulating heat to a storage tank. Can you add solar water heating to your existing home? Most likely. It's a very common practice, whether homemade or commercial heaters, and whether passive or active designs. See the resource list we are providing for details. So, we've covered a lot of ground here. What can you do to follow up? There are a wide range of actions you can take to reduce your home carbon footprint. It may seem a bit overwhelming, and it can take some time to begin seeing a real difference. But I hope that you will take away more than just a list of actions that you can do. More important to me is that you take to heart the title of this webinar: At Home with Carbon Conscious Living. I'm asking you to forevermore look at your home life through a new carbon lens with curiosity about what you can change in your home. In doing so, you won't just see the tricks and techniques described tonight, but you'll discover improvements that only you can see in your own unique setting. To stimulate that carbon conscious thinking, there's nothing like starting with a little guided practice. Consider first some limited measures that you can adopt in a short time without major changes in your home and without buying expensive equipment. Some may seem small, but again, it's about building your carbon consciousness. And who knows who among your friends, neighbors, or family you might inspire. Here are some ideas. Get an energy audit, or do your own. Take the obvious low-cost steps after that audit to improve energy efficiency. Example, attic insulation, caulking, air leaks, etc. Check into available green power for your electric service. Even if you have a fuel-efficient car, whenever possible, try leaving it at home and walk, cycle, catch public transit, or carpool. What about reducing packaging, meaning less processed foods, buying other consumer goods unpackaged, if possible, and including secondhand goods? Have you started assessing your stuff to begin reducing? Base it on what works for you. And how about doing that magic trick of making your house smaller for heating and cooling? Close off some rooms. Try cooking outdoors with a rocket stove or biochar in your backyard or patio. Now, this may not be the best time of the year, but maybe try it on one of these sunny days. And the easiest, of course, is the brick rocket stove. Next summer, try doing a basic outdoor kitchen to reduce summer air conditioning and to improve your comfort, your heat comfort. And of course, using LED light bulbs is as easy as unscrewing one and putting in another. You could use hand-cranked and bicycle-powered appliances and tools wherever you can. Egg beater, coffee grinder, blender, can opener, flashlight, ice cream churn, drills, and even a handsaw. Wouldn't it be great to have a bicycle-powered generator when the grid power goes down next? Try hand tools instead of power tools when appropriate. Share with your neighbors to reduce resource use. Invest in a solar clothes dryer, a rope, You could buy a solar oven if you want to get a little bit more involved in more of an investment, or build a solar oven. Build a solar heat grabber window unit. Do some commuting by bike. Shopping, groceries. Now here's one. Remove that part of the driveway that you don't need, or remove it completely. Reduces urban heat island effect, and you could use the broken concrete as a border for a raised bed garden where the pavement once was. Sequester carbon in the soil. Consider solar electric panels, of course. They may pay themselves back in a few years. And consider starting or discussing a car cooperative with your neighbors. Instead of each of you owning your own car, work out how you could share it. This will be discussed in more detail when you watch Cobb's webinar 4 on how this can actually be done. I want to thank you for being with me tonight and sharing this exciting topic with me. In closing, when thinking about my carbon footprint, I find it interesting that living a low-carbon life carries so many other possible benefits beyond climate impact. I think of terms like healthy heart, active lifestyle. I think of terms like stimulated intellect, satisfied mind, empowered outlook, collaborative living, clear conscience, strong back, healthy relationships, in essence, quality of life. I hope you'll share with me a strong commitment to actually improve quality of life by intentionally lowering your carbon footprint at home.
Karen asks, what components did you use for making and sealing your earthen floor and the wooden discs that she saw in those pictures? Can we talk about those for a second?
Okay, we'll try to make it short. The sealing of the floor is basically a linseed oil mix. And not to get into a lot of detail, but it's where the term linoleum comes from. So it's basically creating a thin layer of linoleum, mixing linseed oil along with a thinner, we used turpentine. And it's a matter of getting a good number of coats into the floor until it's almost like a leather sheet over top, like a sheet of vinyl. And it protects it very well. The discs, as you call them, are actually timber frame cutoffs of black locust lumber, black locust logs. And so we like the look of a log end or a cordwood floor. And it really turned out pretty well. We're very happy with it.
I agree, it's beautiful. Joshua wants to know, can you explain how biochar is sequestering carbon given that you still have to burn the wood, and would you do that outside of tropical or subtropical zones?
Very good question. It's one reason that I thought it was a ridiculous thing to do for many years until I got more information on how it actually works. When you burn the charcoal, burn the biochar, it only burns off the volatile materials, the volatile fuel between the wood cells. The stronger, harder cellulose cells turn into charcoal. And that charcoal is, first of all, you get about as much energy, because it's such an efficient stove, you get about as much energy as if you were using like a rocket stove, because more of the heat is being used, more concentrated. So you still get really good cooking. You're using the heat of the wood, and yet you have a lot of charcoal left. What some people would do is say, I just made some really good charcoal, let's grill. But what I have found and learned is that if you put it in the soil, it's much more valuable there than as a fuel. So I do not burn it.
Great. Donovan wants to know, how do you dry clothes in winter?
We can answer that. Clothes will dry in the winter. It's called sublimation. The ice turns into, water vapor. Takes a little longer, but the sun helps. You get a sunny day in many winters. So that works. We also, if it's not a good day outdoors, and this works well for apartment dwellers too, just use a clothes rack, a drying clothes rack. Again, it's an old-fashioned thing. It's kind of like Back to the Future. And we like to use the things from the past that really work well.
Great. We've got another question. How do you interface with the larger community how do you interface with the larger community about climate-related personal choices without either pretending there's no issue or seeming to be condemning people's choices?
Well, we want to have that conversation, and we try to talk about these things in terms of how can we learn from each other instead of how can we basically do one-upmanship on each other. So we all have different values, different choices, different levels of extremity that we're willing to go to. We went to more extreme measures for our house, and we're not like telling everybody else they have to do that same thing. We just wanted to try to push the edge a little bit. But I think anybody can learn from going to the extreme. And so we don't have a lot of competition along that line. Once in a while, we'll have some very active discussions about what are, either the more ecological methods or what are the more effective methods. I'll say one other thing about that, and that is that natural building can often be done without building very tight or well-insulated structures. We've seen some mistakes along that line. And so we're having an active debate about making sure that the building not only uses less energy when it's built, but uses less energy throughout its life as it goes through its life cycle.
There's another follow-up question about the earthen floor. Someone wants to know about the underlying ingredients for the earth floor.
Okay. We did put a moisture barrier underneath because, as you might expect, there's always moisture in the ground underneath, whether you want it to be there or not. So then it rises, water evaporates. So we put a moisture barrier, and then we insulated. And we made our own pink foam, as we call it, out of straw. It turned out it wasn't very pink. But we made we wanted to have a slightly insulated floor so that we didn't get actually too cool a floor in the summer, which sounds kind of weird. But if you go too cool, you get condensation on the floor. You reach the dew point in the summer, and that creates a lot of moisture and mold problems. So that's we did put some insulation there, and then we put a base layer of mud floor over top of that, and waited a little while and put the final finish layer of floor. Then we had to finish the floor with linseed oil mix. So it's a process, it's involved, and it can be a fun thing to do.
Someone else wants to know, how do you handle rodents with straw bale construction?
Same way you handle rodents with wood construction or concrete construction or any other house. We have around this area in Missouri, we know many people who have rodent problems, whatever house they live in. So it's really not that much different. We use mouse traps, and we close up any gaps just like you would in a regular house. They don't easily get through the straw bales because they're plastered with very hard earthen plaster.
Someone wants to know, do you have a resource for quality hand tools like scythes, hatchets, garden tools, etc., like to actual go buy them?
Yeah, we're fortunate here near Memphis, Missouri, to have a couple of good hardware stores. We can get most everything like that very easily. We're not out in the sticks that badly.
Great. And Susan wants to know, why not build a house of pure cob? Why do you use straw bales?
Now, this is a common error when you are just beginning to look at natural building. It seems like all natural building is good, right? But think about cob as a thermal mass. It is not insulative, okay? Straw bales have a very high level of insulation. Cob has virtually none. It's about, it's like a brick, okay? So if you build just with cob, you're going to have a very cold house in the winter, and you might be cool in the summer, but if there's enough heat to heat up that cob, you could be in a bit of a furnace. So the cob stores the heat, and it doesn't work very well. It stores the heat better than it protects you from the heat, at least in this climate. It works very well in warm climates. Works very well like in Arizona or some areas where they have really cool summers. Very cool nights. And so the cob just cools down. That mass cools down at night. And then during the day, it stays cooler in the house. We don't have that kind of climate here, and it just doesn't work. You can use the cob, but less of it as a coating over your straw bales, not as your major thickness of your wall.
Someone wants to know, do you have ideas for materials to repurpose for homemade window insulation? Maybe they're talking about wool around the windows, possibly. I'm not quite sure what the question means, but maybe you can guess what they mean. Unless the person that asked that, if you maybe ask again and we can get clearer on that. But Dennis, what do you have to say?
Well, I assume they're talking about insulating around the window. Since our house was made with straw bales and straw insulation, we did bring the straw insulation right up to the edge of the windows to make sure we were tight there. I don't generally see natural products like straw and mud being sufficient to get it really tight where you get joints between wood and mud, say. They tend to expand and contract and you get a crack there. I tend to use commercial caulk to make sure that the building performs better.
We've got another one. They want to know, can you explain more about biochar?
I could talk about biochar for hours. Let's see. Well, one thing that makes it work really well as a soil amendment is that when all the volatile gases are burnt out from those cellular walls, you have a larger surface area inside that porous material than like probably the floor of a house or more, which means that a lot more storage of good stuff can be held within that biochar. So what it does, it's more of a storage medium than like a fertilizer. It stores nitrogen when you've inoculated with nitrogen-rich things like urine or other nitrogen-rich products. When you put it in the compost, you're inoculating it more by getting more bugs, more bacteria and fungus in there that are all beneficial. The plants depend on bacteria and fungus in order to survive and to thrive. And so when it's stored in the biochar and that goes into the soil, then the soil acts as a natural holder of all that for the plants when they need it. If the biochar is not there, things like nitrogen can run off really easily and it's gone. If the biochar is there, it can be stored for months or years, which is very unusual for nitrogen. Even commercial nitrogen runs off if you don't have something to hold it. So biochar is an excellent way. It also helps to hold water in the soil. So during drought, your plants are going to do better. All that porous material stores good stuff for your plants.
Shane wants to know, what is the source for DR's biodiesel fuel, and is there concern about the way that the oil is produced around supplanting food production?
Okay, a couple of good questions. We get it from MFA, it's called. It's the Missouri Farmers Association. So the farmers are very interested in selling their products, their corn or soybeans, whatever it is, to make biofuel, and they have an outlet to sell it. So we buy it wholesale from them. I look at the use of cropland for growing fuel, similar to cropland for growing cotton or growing wood, growing flax, whatever it is. That we use a lot of cropland to grow non-food products which serve our community, serve our society. I am concerned that if everybody was growing their fuel, there may not be enough cropland for food. Not because it's impossible to do that, but because we are driving so many miles. I don't think the fuel question in this country is going to be solved until we reduce our miles closer to what we do at Dancing Rabbit, which is 10% of the American average.
Another question. Any experience working with biochar in alkaline soils like we have in the Southwest? We've heard it can even make a soil more basic.
Yes, you have to be careful if you already have alkaline soils. It can increase alkalinity. I do not have experience in that. We don't have that problem here.
Shane asks, making biochar, I guess, can it become, be used as activated charcoal for food, for like treating food poisoning and that sort of thing? Is it basically just carbon or charcoal that you're making?
It's charcoal. Once it comes out of the biochar stove, it's just charcoal. And it could be used to make fires, to filter things. It's not activated charcoal because that's a more intense process, using energy to make it much more potent. Okay, but charcoal in general can be used as a poultice or other means that she's talking about.
Someone wants to know, what did you use your tire wall for?
The tire wall is a retaining wall. It holds back a bank of earth for our berm. We have an earth berm protecting the north side of the house from the north winds. So basically the tire wall is replacing what would otherwise be used, which is a concrete retaining wall. A great deal more of carbon expended. And I think the cost would be about the same. We're paying quite a bit of labor for all that tire pounding and tire filling, but concrete is not cheap, and it takes some expertise to pour it and get it right. So you got to pay labor for that. So I'm glad to pay a little bit more labor here on the farm, provide more jobs, and recycle a product that would otherwise be a problem.
Someone wants to know, what did you use your urbanite for? I think you had a photo of it, but maybe you can talk about how you've used your urbanite in the building of your home or any other home.
Yeah, the urbanite, again, is the slabs of recycled concrete, sidewalks or floors or whatever. And there are piles of it all over the country going to no use. So recycling it turns it from a problem into a solution. We used it all around our entire foundation to be the support footers for the posts and beams and for setting the straw bales on a very firm foundation.
There was a follow-up question about the earthen tire wall. Well, the tire wall, and the question is, are you filling them with earth, just raw earth?
Yep, just raw earth. We don't use topsoil because it tends to still decompose and not remain hard inside the tire. Yeah.
Great. And can you explain about your solar grabber?
Okay, the solar grabber window, once again, it's just a very simple way to get a few square feet of solar air collector. It's a small box against the window that has glazing over it, kind of like a solar collector for water, but it's just air going through there. And when air is trapped between that glass on the outside and the black surface on the inside, again, it has that greenhouse effect, creates very hot air from the sun, and hot air rises and goes right up into the house. It works.
Great. And let's see. How long did it take you to build your the foundation for your building?
Well, like we did the entire digging of the trench by hand, and then we did all the placement of the urbanite by hand. Very heavy material. So when the first building season was over, we had all the foundation in place, and we put tarps on it and waited for the snow to disappear.
Great. Unless there's any more questions, I think that's going to be the end here. Great. So, thank you, Dennis. That was really great.
Thank you.
Super informative. I think we got a lot of questions answered.
Thank
I
you.
think there was a lot of great value in what you just shared with us. So again, just to be clear, Dennis has shared a lot of great documents, and he just did a great presentation. Applause, Dennis. Thank you so much for being here.
For y'all.
I really appreciate it. And we actually have one more question. Could you talk about building codes and how they need to be changed to allow sustainability? Just one more question.
Okay. Probably the first thing to talk about there is straw bales. They are a great example of how building codes have been changed because people have tried natural building techniques, perfected them, and convinced the government folks to approve them in the code. Straw bales are allowed in many codes now, nationally. And so I guess the question is, how do we go about advancing that type of thing? Read the question again.
Yeah, could you talk about the need to change the codes in order for buildings to be more sustainable?
Yeah, well, it's a two-way street. I think the codes are good to make sure that just anything that's natural is not automatically good. So I think we're actually looking at Dancing Rabbit to make sure that we're setting some sort of standards. We're not going to actually have a code, but we're going to have some more guidelines. And I think that's a good idea. I do think that a lot of the codes, if you've worked with code systems, they are ridiculous at times in the things that they require and the things that they don't approve, not necessarily based on the real performance of any materials. I do believe that if more people build in areas like ours where we don't have the restriction against doing natural building and using some of these materials, we can prove some materials, we can show how it can work, test the performance of some of these natural buildings, and get more of these in the mainstream so that people in the cities and suburban areas can use some of these techniques that work very well.
Great. I think that's it. We're going to wrap it up. Big applause, everybody. Virtual applause for Dennis. Thanks for doing it, Dennis.